Good morning, everyone. This is Russell Rucker, and I'm here for another constitutional talk. And today I want to get back to our series on the Federalist Papers, and we are up to Federalist number 2. It's written by John Jay. John Jay is an important Supreme Court justice. He's our first Supreme Court Chief Justice, and he begins his first writing in the Federalist Papers is number 2. So we move to J. And keep in mind, these are editorials written in the paper trying to convince us of approving the Constitution. And it begins, to the people of the state of New York, when the people of America reflect that they are now called upon to decide a question which in its consequences must prove one of the most important that ever engaged their attention, the propriety of their taking a very comprehensive as well as various serious view of it will be evident. Nothing is more certain than the indispensable necessity of government, and it is equally undeniable that whenever and however it is instituted, the people must cede to it some of their natural rights in order to vest it with requisite powers. It is well worthy of consideration, therefore, whether it would conduce more to the interests of the people of America that they should, to all general purposes, be one nation under one federal government, or that they should divide themselves into separate confederacies and give to the head of each the same kind of powers which they are advised to place in one national government. Now, I'd like to stop there for a moment to really point out what he's saying, because he's saying that it really doesn't matter whether it's a state government or whether it's a federal government. We still have to give those same powers in order to have government. And we must have a good, solid government to work with. So it doesn't matter whether it's a strong federal government or a strong state governments or regional governments. And this is an important thing to understand, is we had no choice but to institute a serious government if we're going to self-govern ourselves. And in order to be free and independent nation, we have to govern ourselves. But he continues on. It has until lately been received an uncontradicted opinion that the prosperity of the people of America depended on their constituting firmly united, and the wishes, prayers, and efforts of our best and wisest citizens have been constantly directed to that object. But politicians now appear who insist that this opinion is erroneous, and that instead of looking for safety and happiness in union, we ought to seek in a division of the states into distinct confederacies or sovereignties. However extraordinary this new doctrine may appear, it nevertheless has its advocates and certain characters who much oppose to it for merely at our present of the number. Whatever may be the arguments or inducements which have wrought this change in the sentiments and declarations of these gentlemen, it is certainly would not be wise in the people at large to adopt these new political tenets without being fully convinced that they are founded in truth and sound policy. This Federalist 2 goes on about why we have to have a strong federal government and not regional and state confederacies. This is important to the idea that we need all the states to sign on to the new Constitution. It's important that we unite together or we become separate countries with state jealousies, warring factions, and probably civil wars running through us, just the same as we had in the 1860s when a group of the states decided to leave and we wound up in a violent civil war. But we're speaking here from knowledge of history so we can look at these things. They could not. So Jay continues, "It has often given me pleasure to observe that independent America was not composed of detached and distant territories, but that one connected, fertile, wide-spreading country was the portion of our Western Sons of Liberty. Providence has in a particular manner blessed it with a variety of soils and productions, and watered it with innumerable streams for the delight and accommodation of its inhabitants. A succession of navigable waterways forms a kind of chain round its borders, as if to bind us together, while the most noble rivers in the world, running at convenient distances, present them with highways for easy communication of friendly aids and the mutual transportation and exchange of their various commodities." So when we're talking about the waterways, which were our main highways in the 1700s, you had shipping coming up rivers and territories. You had shipping coming in from the Atlantic, but we were over here by ourselves, away from Europe. And so this idea that we were bound by the waterways is an important thing to consider. And he continues, "With equal pleasure, I have as often taken notice that the providence has been placed to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in their manners and customs, and who by their joint counsels, arms, and efforts, fighting side by side throughout a long and bloody war, have nobly established general liberty and independence. This country and this people seems to have been made for each other, and it appears as if it was the design of Providence that an inheritance so proper and convenient for a band of brethren united to each other by strongest ties should never be split into a number of unsocial, jealous, and alien sovereignties." So here again, he's talking about those that wish to put us into regional countries, like the South being one, the Middle States being another, the industrial Northeast being another, and splitting us up into 3 or 4 groups would be a mistake, he's arguing. Similar sentiments have hitherto prevailed among all orders and denominations of men among us. To all general purposes, we have uniformly been one people, each individual citizen everywhere enjoying the same national rights, privileges, and protection. As a nation, we have made peace and war. As a nation, we have vanquished our common enemies. As a nation, we have formed alliances and made treaties and entered into various compacts and conventions with foreign states. A strong sense of the value and blessings of union induced the people at a very early period to institute a federal government to serve and perpetuate it. Now, that federal government is the Articles of Confederation. It was brought on by the Continental Congress. Just something to be sure you understand here. Continuing on. They formed it almost as soon as they had political existence. Nay, at the time when their inhabitants were in flames, when many of their citizens were bleeding, and when progress of hostility and dissolution left little room for those calm and mature inquiries and reflections which must ever precede the formation of a wise and well-balanced government. For a free people, it is not to be wondered at that a government instituted in times of inauspicious should on experiment be found greatly deficient and inadequate to the purposes it was intended to answer. This reminds me of a quote that states that this country, this government, was founded for a religious and moral people and would be inapt for any other, or thereabouts. But I continue on. This intelligent people perceived and regretted these defects, still continuing no less attached to union than enamored of liberty. They observed the danger which immediately threatened the former and more remotely the latter, and being persuaded the ample security for both could only be found in a national government more wisely framed, they, as with one voice, convened the late convention at Philadelphia to take that important subject under consideration. And this is what we're talking about. We're arguing over the Constitution created by these men in the banner behind me, the painting of the signing of the Constitution. So we're talking about the country being brought together for this meeting, which became the Constitutional Convention. But I continue on where he discusses this convention. This convention, composed of men who possess the confidence of the people, and many of whom have become highly distinguished by their patriotism, virtue, and wisdom in times which tried the minds and hearts of men, undertook the arduous task in the mild season of peace, with minds unoccupied by their subjects. They passed many months in cool, uninterrupted, and daily consultation, and finally, without having been awed by power or influenced by their passions except love for their country, they presented and recommended to the people the plan produced by their joint and very unanimous councils. And he's talking about the continuing Continental Convention that went on for 4 months and how they were working together. So I continue. Admit for so is the fact that this plan is only recommended, not imposed, to blind approbation, nor to blind reprobation, but to that sedate and candid consideration which the magnitude and importance of the subject demand, and which it certainly ought to receive, but this is more to be wished than expected. It may be so considered and examined. Experience on a former occasion teaches us not to be too sanguine in such hopes. It is not yet forgotten that well-grounded apprehensions to imminent danger induced the people of America to form the memorable Congress of 1774. And the Congress of 1774 is our first Continental Congress where they gathered trying to find some kind of unanimous grounds in which we could find a way to have peace with England. And that's the Congress he's referring to here. That body recommended certain measures to their constituents, and the event proved their wisdom. Yet it is fresh in our memories how soon the press began to teem with pamphlets and weekly papers against those very measures. Not only many of the officers of government who obeyed the dictates of personal interest, but others from a mistaken estimate of consequences or the undue influence of former attachments, or whose ambition aimed at objects which did not correspond with the public good, were indefatigable in their efforts to persuade the people to reject the advice of that patriotic Congress. Many, indeed, were deceived and deluded, but the great majority of the people reasoned and decided judiciously, and happily they are in reflecting that they did so. They considered that Congress was composed of many wise and experienced men, that being convened from different parts of the country, they brought with them and communicated to each other a variety of useful information, that in the course of the time they passed together in inquiring into and discussing the true interests of their country, they must have acquired very accurate knowledge on that head, that they were individually interested in the public liberty and prosperity, and therefore that it was not less their inclination than their duty to recommend only such measures as, after the most mature deliberation, they really thought prudent and advisable. Now here he's really getting into the Continental Congress and how they worked together, and how they came from various areas of the country with different objectives for the purposes of those various places in the country. So there was wide differences in how they lived and how they dealt with things. So he's bringing that up. But Jay continues on. These and similar considerations then induced the people to rely greatly on the judgment and integrity of the Congress. And they took their advice, notwithstanding the various arts and endeavors used to deter them from it. But if the people at large have reason to confide in the men of the Congress, few of whom have been fully tried and generally known, still greater reasons have they now to respect the judgment and advice of the convention. For it is well known that some of the most distinguished members of that Congress, who have been tried and justly approved for patriotism and abilities, and who have grown old in acquiring political information, were also members of the convention, and carried into it their accumulated knowledge and experience. So they gathered in 1774, and by 1787, we decided to begin a convention to fix the Articles of Confederation. And he's talking about here how these wise people that had served in government and been serving in government gathered again, many who had been there originally, although we had new members, to help aid in the convention itself to rewrite a constitution. And he continues on. It is worthy of remarks that not only the first, but every succeeding Congress, as well as the late convention, have invariably joined with the people in thinking that the prosperity of America depended on its union. To preserve and perpetuate it was the great object of the people in forming the convention, and it is also the great object of the plan which the convention has advised them to adopt. With what property, therefore, or for what good purposes are attempts at the particular period made by some men to depreciate the importance of union? Or why is it suggested that 3 or 4 confederacies would be better than one? I am persuaded in my own mind that the people have always thought right on this subject, and that their universal and uniform attachments to the cause of the Union rest on great and weighty reasons, which I shall endeavor to develop and explain in some ensuing papers. They who promote the idea of substituting the number of distinct confederacies in the room of the plan of the convention seem clearly to foresee that the rejection of it would put the continuance of the Union in the utmost jeopardy. that certainly would be the case, and I sincerely wish that it may be as clearly foreseen by every good citizen that whenever the dissolution of the Union arises, America will have reason to exclaim, in the words of the poet, farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness. Bubulus. And there's Jay's first letter as the Federalist Papers. And Jay was a strong Federalist. He served as our Chief Justice, first Chief Justice, nominated by George Washington of the Supreme Court. He is an important figure in original understanding. The idea of separation, and this came up towards the end of the convention as well, where you had people trying to find a reason to not adopt it, those that were opposed. We did have some great dissenters in the convention, such as Gary, for instance. And they made a motion towards the end of the convention that they would go to these state conventions and allow them to present amendments, and then have another convention to go over the amendments. But that was shot down, and mostly by people that just were looking for a reason not to approve the Constitution. State jealousies and trying to get the will of one state over the other is really what brought this on. But in Federalist 2, Jay is arguing that we need to unite as a country. We need to stay united. We shouldn't let state jealousies and station jealousies determine an idea that we should separate. And that there are people wanting to separate into different confederacies. So you would have countries with 3 or 4 states in them instead of the large country we have today. And this really is important to stay united. We had to unite to fight the British. And this is what he's talking about, the bonding of the country together in the highways of the rivers, and we really were at peace with liberty over here, away from the other great countries of the world. So we were united in our forests and our seclusion over here. And that was a kind of strength that we had. And then we should remain united. We should all accept the new Constitution so that we can move forward as a common country. And that's really the argument Jay's making here. And I think it's easy to see the importance of that now being this vast country that we are. Think about the importance of Jay, Hamilton, and Madison as they argue for approval of the Constitution. A Constitution that I think you'll agree most of us love today and think that it was a good, solid document. And with that, we'll catch you next time on the next Constitutional Talk. You have a good day for now.